Hey everyone, Justin here. Today I'm going to show you how to take the perfect photo of your bike using nothing but a camera and a Swiffer mop. Because we all know if you can't be fast, you got to look fast. That's been my theory for a long time. So we're going to go over 4 things today. Number 1, how to get your bike ready to be photographed. Number 2, where and when to take the perfect photo of your bike. Number 3, we're actually going to take the photo of the bike. I'm going to show you what I do to get the absolute best looking shots for social media. And number 4, probably most importantly, we're gonna hop inside to the computer, we're gonna edit those shots, and I'm gonna help you really bring them to life to get the best out of those photos for your Instagram and your social media. All right, so first things first, we gotta clean the bike and get it ready to be photographed. So number 1, we're only ever gonna clean and show and photograph this side of the bike, which is the drive side of the bike. Number 2, bar tape is a really common area that gets dirty. Some blue dish soap gets it clean really easily. Number 3, we want to align the tires to the stems. This is like a pro internet points move, but it's also useful because when it comes time to actually pump your tires up, you just have to look for the label of the tire. It helps you find the valve a little bit easier. So thirdly, want to clean off any grease or sweat, or like if you have spilled drink on your bike. As much as we do now, it saves time in Photoshop later, so it's always worth it. All right, so number 2, where and when to take photos. So counterintuitively, days like today with a lot of direct sun are actually really hard to take photos because you get a lot of harsh shadows. You might even be seeing some on me right now with the sun bright behind me. Days that are really easy to take photographs are days where there's a consistent overcast, but it's still bright out. That's actually kind of my preferred time to take photos. If you have to take a photo in direct sun like I am gonna have to today, what works a little bit easier is to actually put the sun behind the bike rather than in front of it, and then exposed for the bike itself. Next up, I know a lot of people like to take photos of their bikes like under trees. Really watch out for that mottled light though, where there's both shadow and direct sun. Mottled light is really hard because the camera doesn't know what to properly expose for, so you get a lot of really dark areas and a lot of bright areas. So next up, the background of your shot really matters a lot. So you see a lot of people on Instagram who do bikes against a wall, BAAW. That's really common, where you put your bike right up against a really simple, sometimes contrast color wall. That's really nice, but what I prefer is to actually put the bike a long way away from something and get some cool leading lines, and that's what we're gonna do today. So you can see behind me, I've got this really neat path, right? So the plan for today, we're gonna put the bike in the middle of the path, then we've got those leading lines going right to the bike, and we're gonna step back away from it. The background is kind of blurred out. Personally, I think it looks a little bit better and you don't see as many people doing it. So if you want to stick out on social media, you got to do something a little bit differently. Number 3, how to actually take a photo of your bike. So a couple things first off before we actually shoot this photo. 1, if you have a cell phone with portrait mode, you want to turn that off. It's great for portraits of people, but the fine details of a bike, like the cables or the shifters, often get messed up in portrait mode, so we want to turn that off. Number 2, if you have a camera with the capability to take raw photos, you want to go into your settings and turn raw on. We'll get to that in a little bit. All right, so in order to get your photo of your bike, you got to have the bike standing up, right? So you've got 2 options. If you have a friend, it's easier, but if you don't have a friend, all you need is a Swiffer. If you've got a friend, all you really need to do is get the bike in the right position. And I'll go over the details of the positioning here in a second. And basically, just have them stand back here and let go. And the bike's only going to stand for a second or 2, but in that second, that's when you take your shot. All right, so if your friends are tired of your bike antics, this is actually my preferred way of doing it. So what you need is some sort of support to hold your bike up. Just lean the bike back a little bit, prop the Swiffer handle under the saddle there, bam. One other pro tip I have, especially if you're using the Swiffer method where the bike could roll forward and back, is using the cable adjuster on one of your brakes. Tighten it so that the bike doesn't actually roll forward or back. All right, so we've got the bike steady, but there's a couple of things we need to do to get it perfect for maximum internet points. So 1, we got our tires and our valve stems lined up, but we got to get those on the bottom. We got to get our cranks aligned and our bike in the right gear. So you got a couple options. You definitely want to be in the big ring up front. For the back, you can be either in whatever gear makes the chain perfectly horizontal, or you can be in the smallest cog. Either are acceptable. Personally, I prefer biggie smalls. And then lastly, we got to get the crank aligned to be either in line with the rear stay or in line with the seat tube. Either one are acceptable, but you do not want to be straight up and down or perfectly horizontal. Lastly, it's worth noting that depending on who you ask, you might want to take the little valve nuts off the valve stems. Personally, I leave them on, but for maximum internet points, you might want to take them off. All right, can you believe it's time to finally take the photo? So number one, you want to step back further than you might think. One of the cool things about photography is you can force someone's eye into wherever you want it to be. So with a camera, you can put that viewer wherever you want. And I really like putting the camera sort of at mid-bike level. So I'm gonna do that. I'm gonna take the shot kind of from down here rather than from up here. Secondly, we're gonna step a long way back. 15, 20 feet away, and we're gonna zoom in. For you who have like optical lenses, like the new iPhones have like 2x zooms or whatever that is, use that lens. Here's a shot taken from different locations, and the goal was to keep the bike the same amount in frame, but I'm moving forward and back and then zooming in with different lenses, and you can see how much that perspective changes. So here's the thing, that looks pretty good. And you might say, Justin, even if you're just zooming in digitally, you're just cropping off, you're losing resolution. Yeah, a little bit. But the thing is, like, that perspective and that shot is totally worth it. That looks super good. All right, and lastly, if you've got a DSLR, I want to show you a couple little pro tips. Obviously, we want to shoot in RAW. If you have the option to get a longer lens, that is a huge advantage that a DSLR has over a cell phone. So for those of you on crop sensor cameras, the 50mm 1.8 that Canon and Nikon both have, it's like $150. That's a pretty good lens, but basically the longer of a lens, the better. And lastly, don't forget to grab some cool detail shots. Cool, so now that we've got all of our shots, let's go ahead and go back inside. We're gonna edit these photos and get them ready for posting.
All right, so we're back inside. I've got the photo picked out that I'm going to edit for you today. I'm going to edit both on the Mac Photos app as well as the Lightroom, kind of at the same time. This isn't really a photo editing tutorial, but I just want to show you broadly the settings I use that work really well for me. The important thing to remember here, one, it doesn't really matter the exact numbers that I choose. It really only depends on what you think looks good. Secondly, for those of you who have Photoshop, we're going to hop into Photoshop at the end, and I'm going to show you a little bit of an advanced technique. Thirdly, it doesn't really matter what software you're using. There's tutorials out there for all of them. So if you have some software, you can just Google like beginner photo editing software. But let's go ahead and hop into Mac Photos right now, and you can watch on Lightroom over there while I'm doing broadly the same thing. So for those of you who have RAW editing, like we talked about earlier, you're going to have a little bit more editing power right here. But the first thing I'm going to do is adjust the white balance, and it ranges from cool to warm. Really doesn't really matter what number you pick. You can see like I can set it all the way cold and it looks like it's very frigid. I can turn it warm and it looks kind of orange and spacey, but we're just going to pick a number that works, that basically looks good. There's ways you can pick a correct white balance, but really it just matters about what looks good. The Mac Photos app is a little bit less specific. So this light up here is basically adjusting the exposure, how bright or dark it gets. We're just going to pick kind of a happy medium for like the mid-tones of the bike. And then we're going to come down to, in Mac Photos, I'm going to use this curves editor down here. In Photoshop, I can use the shadows and the highlights and the contrast. But we're going to do what's called a contrast curve. So the numbers, or the pixels down here, these represent the dark areas. Up top on the right, they represent the bright areas. So basically, I'm going to pull down the dark areas. We're going to make the dark areas a little bit darker. And I'm going to come up to the lights. We're going to make the lights just a little bit brighter. That's looking pretty good to me. We can throw a vignette on it. The trick with vignettes is always go a little less than you think. It shouldn't be that people see there's a vignette on there. It just makes the bike pop a little bit more. The way I like to do it is turn the vignette up super hard, like way too much. And then you can adjust your radius settings and get your vignette where you want it. Dial in the softness that you like. That looks good. And then come down and pull the vignette back. That just makes the bike pop just a little bit more. If you want to get into like saturation and such, that's an option too. In Mac Photos, it's just called color. You can obviously dial it way too far, or you can go black and white. I usually like to turn up the saturation just a little bit. Nothing too much so it looks like the photo's been oversaturated, but just enough to really make the bike pop. All right, so let's take a look at what we did. So we've adjusted the contrast through the curves editor. We've adjusted the white balance, the brightness, and the saturation. This is where I've ended up. I like that. And that was the before. So just how long did that take? 1.5 minutes worth of editing. We really made the bike pop a lot. One little thing that I like to do is when I'm mostly done, I'll hit done, and then I'll kind of go back to like my app wherever I'm in, and basically just like zoom out and take a look at the photo at like this big on your screen, because if people are going to be looking at that photo on Instagram, that's the size they're going to see. All right, so that looks pretty good. And for the majority of you, you're actually good to stop right there. You can go ahead and post that photo to Instagram. For those of you who've noticed that I've left a little bit of the broom in there, we're going to take care of that right now. So one, as much as possible, you always want to get things right in camera. So I would move the broom and adjust the angle of my shot to hide that broom as much as possible. But say something happens, you missed a piece or whatever, and a little bit is left over. For those of you who have Photoshop, there's actually ways to get rid of that. So I'm gonna hop into Photoshop right now, show you two pretty easy ways to get rid of little mistakes that you might have made. All right, so in Photoshop, I'm going to show you two ways to do this. The first and easiest way, the one that I would suggest defaulting to, is essentially called content-aware fill. And what content-aware fill does is it looks at the area around the image and it tries to make its best guess to fill in what you're trying to do. So the first step to content-aware fill is you need to mask out the area that you want to get corrected. So we're going to hit the L key on our keyboard. We're just going to do a quick mask. It doesn't have to be absolutely perfect. We're just going to select the area that I want to get rid of, this part of the broom right here, come into your edit menu, choose content aware fill, and it's going to look at the area around the bike and it's going to try to figure out what to fill in that section with. So it's actually great right here. You can see it actually made a mistake. It's thinking that the back of the seat tube is what needs to be filled in. So the cool thing with this latest update of Adobe is you can actually come in and using this brush, you can remove parts of your image that you don't want it to draw from. So I just told Photoshop not to look at that part of the bike, and I'm going to undo this part right here, and it's making its best guess, and already that looks fantastic. So I'm just going to hit OK, look back at our image, and zoomed in up here, right here up close, you can see that, yeah, it's absolutely not perfect, but if you zoom out a little bit, nobody's ever going to see that. We're viewing these on Instagram. That's all we need to do. All right, so I've gone ahead and undone that content aware fill, and I've reselected the area of the bike that I'm looking to fill in using the L key, the select, the lasso select, and now I'm going to do option 2, which is the clone stamp. So if content aware fill isn't working for you, if the area is just too complex, it's not drawing from the right info, clone stamp is another great option. So if you hit the S key on your keyboard, it's going to bring up something that looks like a brush, but if you hit the Alt or Option, depending on Windows or Mac, you're going to set a source area, and that's the part of the image that it's going to use, and it's going to copy on the new layer or into the selection that we've made. So I've defined my source area. I usually go for somewhere pretty near where I'm drawing from. And the cool thing is if you hover your mouse over, it'll show you a preview. So if you have like your repeating textures you need to line up, you can do that. And now I can literally just paint in, just keep moving it up, just get something that works. Hit erase. Now, if you want, you can adjust your brush. You can make your brush smaller and softer. We can clean up this little edge right here, make it look good. All right, that's it. I hope you found that useful. If you have any questions or anything, you know what to do. Justin Does Triathlon on Instagram if you want to see my own bike photos. And with that, go take some awesome photos, and I'll see you guys in the next one.